You might be shocked to find out that it's not just animals that have been exhibited over the years. This is the disturbing history of human zoos.
One of the most disgusting public displays imaginable: human zoos.
In the 1870s, zoos around Europe began to add exhibitions of exotic populations alongside their animal enclosures. Throughout the Western world, these so-called ethnological exhibitions emerged in cities such as London, Paris, and New York.
They were often framed as learning exercises for the curious, but, as we shall soon see, there were far more nefarious things at work behind the scenes.
People from communities around the world were exhibited in recreations of their so-called natural environments, with animals, plants, and sometimes buildings supposedly from their homelands. One of the first known exhibitions shown in Europe featured people from a Sami community from the far north of Europe. This was a huge success, and soon more appeared in zoos across Europe, becoming larger and more elaborate.
Mapping civilization from the highest to the lowest, right? With the lowest at that time said to be Africans.
At the turn of the century, these ethnological exhibitions were still growing in popularity. Between 1877 and 1912, approximately 30 human exhibits were presented in one of Paris's most popular zoos. As their popularity increased, however, so did the harmful messages that they were spreading.
Egyptians were made to ride camels in front of model pyramids, while Asians were sometimes told to roast and eat dogs in front of live audiences.
The exhibitions often advertised the cultures they presented as uncivilized, pushing the ideas of Western superiority and European imperialism. It also promoted scientific racism that classified these cultures as more or less civilized on a scale that went from great apes to Western Europeans.
Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University were saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being.
These ideas justified colonialism that was going on around the world at the time, especially across Africa. The so-called performers, or savages, that featured in these exhibits came to the West looking for better lives. American and European businessmen traveled around the world looking for volunteers to display in zoos back home.
People back then simply didn't see the problem with it. They formed long lines and huddled around these displays in tightly packed groups.
They were often promised access to education and a better quality of life, although many received neither. Evidence shows that the performers were misled and mistreated, with some never making it home.
Will the pygmies brought last week to the World's Fair prove Darwin's theory of the missing link? Will a study of the little black children of the African jungles shed light on the theory evolved by Darwin as regards the evolution of the human race?
One man from a group of 9 indigenous Australians died of illness less than a year after his arrival in the U.S. Instead of being sent home, his body was put on display in Cleveland. It was not uncommon for the bodies of deceased performers to be dissected, stuffed, and displayed without their consent after their deaths.
To spread this narrative as far and wide as possible, souvenirs such as postcards, photographs, and ceramic pottery which featured racial caricatures were sold to the public at these events.
Many of the performers were also subjected to humiliating objectification. One famous example of this was the career of Saartjie Baartman, a Khoisan woman who was advertised as a savage female and displayed throughout England and Ireland. Huge focus was placed on Saartjie's body. She was dressed by organizers in tight clothes, with guests being encouraged to touch her buttocks to prove that it was real.
It is believed that the pygmies, who are said to represent the lowest form of human development, are next removed from the simian family.
One of the most famous performers at a human zoo was a young man called Odie Benga, a Congolese pygmy who was put on display at the Bronx Zoo alongside apes and other animals. His short stature and sharpened teeth made him an extremely popular attraction. Shockingly, organizers called Benga the missing link, suggesting that he was closer to apes than European whites. It was during this time that some began to protest the exhibits. Some black New York clergymen were understandably outraged at the sight of a human being sharing a cage with wild animals, but the racist system still in place made it very difficult for demonstrators to change things.
Neither the Negro nor the white man is related to the monkey.
After just 10 days as a resident of the monkey house, Benga was removed from the zoo and sent to an orphanage. He never made it back to the Congo. In 1916, after 10 years in the United States, Benga shot himself in the heart. The story of Odie Benga and Saartjie Baartman are just 2 out of the thousands of people who were misled, manipulated, and taken advantage of to fill the pockets of European businessmen.
They were considered by men of science at that time to be the lowest form of humans.
Surviving as late as the 1950s, human zoos remain one of the most shocking and inhumane forms of entertainment in recent history. The suffering of the people who performed in these exhibitions must never be forgotten. Thanks for watching this episode of History 101. Please be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.